Imagine waking up to a world where every neighbor is a potential adversary, your borders are ringed by hostility, and just when you need your friends the most, those you counted on for protection and support, they are nowhere to be found. That is precisely the heart-stopping predicament Iran finds itself in today. After a recent catastrophic conflict, Iran is discovering that its much-touted alliances with the world's two great powers, Russia and China, are far shakier than Tehran ever imagined. Why did Moscow and Beijing step aside when Iran faced its gravest military crisis in decades? What led to this moment of abandonment, and what does it reveal about the future shape of power in the Middle East and beyond? Today, we'll unravel the global chessboard, expose the calculations behind Russian and Chinese realpolitik, and explore what Iran's isolation means for the world, for business, and for the high-stakes tech race that underpins military might. Let's begin by rewinding the clock. For more than 4 decades, since the Islamic Revolution of 1979, Iran has been a nation under siege, economically, militarily, and diplomatically. Its military, once a proud force bristling with the latest American jets and Soviet tanks, has been battered by wave after wave of international sanctions. These sanctions, imposed by the United States and its allies, have choked off access to spare parts, new equipment, and the global arms market. As a result, Iran's Air Force became a museum of aging F-4 Phantoms and MiG-29s, planes that first took to the skies when disco ruled the radio. To keep these relics flying, Iranian engineers have resorted to cannibalizing parts from grounded aircraft, improvising repairs, and even reverse engineering components in secret workshops. The story of Iran's Air Force is a story of ingenuity under pressure, but also of growing vulnerability. In this climate of pressure and isolation, Iran has spent years seeking lifelines, alliances that could break its international solitude. Enter Russia and China. On paper, the relationships looked promising. In the year 2021, Iran and China inked a sweeping 25-year comprehensive strategic partnership. The deal, trumpeted by Iranian media as a game-changer, pledged cooperation across trade, energy, infrastructure, and, crucially, defense. Russia, meanwhile, had received Iranian drones for its military campaigns and boasted about deepening military and technical cooperation. For Tehran, these ties were not just about boosting trade or showcasing diplomatic clout, they were about survival. But alliances are tested not in times of peace but in moments of crisis. And when war with Israel erupted just last month, the true nature of Iran's partnerships was laid bare. Within just under 2 weeks, precisely 12 days, according to regional media, Iran's vaunted air defenses crumbled. Senior military leaders, some of whom had shaped Iran's defense doctrine for decades, were killed or incapacitated. Israeli jets, long feared for their precision and reach, flew missions over Iranian skies with almost no resistance. The world watched as United States air power joined in, targeting critical nuclear sites and strategic installations. These were not limited skirmishes. These were full-scale, high-tech attacks that exposed every weakness in Iran's defenses. Yet what did Russia offer? Not weapons, not troops, not intelligence. Instead, Moscow issued a series of strongly worded condemnations of the strikes, blaming Washington and calling for dialogue. President Vladimir Putin, usually quick to seize on regional crises to expand Russian influence, stopped well short of any concrete military assistance. The Russian Foreign Ministry repeatedly emphasized that the strategic partnership agreement with Iran did not, in fact, obligate Moscow to provide military aid in times of war. For Iranian officials, this was a bitter pill. As the reformist Iranian daily Shargh editorialized, this alliance, at critical junctures, is based more on shifting interests than on steadfast commitments. The frustration in Tehran is not just academic. Ali Motahari, a former deputy speaker of Iran's parliament, put it bluntly in a widely shared statement. He lamented that Russia, despite years of defense cooperation, refuses to sell Iran its sophisticated S-400 missile defense system, a weapon system that Moscow has happily delivered to Turkey and Saudi Arabia, both of whom are not exactly Iran's friends. Motahari's frustration reflects a broader sense of betrayal. While Iran supplied Russia with drones for its war in Ukraine, Moscow has not reciprocated with the advanced weaponry Tehran so desperately needs. Even more galling, many of the promised arms deals, such as the acquisition of the Sukhoi 35 fighter jets and Mi-28 attack helicopters, have stalled. According to investigative reports, aside from a handful of trainer jets, none of the cutting-edge equipment has reached Iranian soil. Russian production bottlenecks, coupled with diplomatic pressure from Persian Gulf monarchies, Israel, and the United States, have left Iran empty-handed and vulnerable. So, if Russia is a partner in name only, could China step in where Moscow will not? Eager to modernize its battered air force, Iran has set its sights on Beijing's arsenal, specifically the Chengdu J-10C fighter jet and the HQ-9 long-range air defense system. The J-10C is no ordinary plane. It's a so-called 4.5-generation single-engine fighter equipped with advanced avionics, active electronically scanned array radar, and long-range PL-15 missiles. The HQ-9, meanwhile, is a missile battery capable of tracking and intercepting threats at distances of up to 125 kilometers. On paper, these are formidable weapons, able to contest the airspace against the likes of Israel's F-35Y fleet. But here's where the harsh reality of international politics comes crashing in. Beijing, for all its talk of partnership, is keeping Iran at arm's length. Why? The answer, according to Dr. Evangeline Cheng of the National University of Singapore's Middle East Institute, lies in China's strategic pragmatism rather than ideological solidarity. In other words, China's foreign policy is not guided by loyalty or shared values. It is driven by cold, hard calculations about what best serves Beijing's interests. And those interests, in the 21st century, are deeply intertwined with Iran's Sunni Arab rivals. Consider this. In the year 2024 alone, China's trade with the states of the Gulf Cooperation Council, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Kuwait, Bahrain, and Oman soared past a staggering 300 billion United States dollars. That figure dwarfs China's trade with Iran and makes clear where Beijing's true priorities lie. The Gulf states provide China with much of its oil and gas, and they are eager buyers of Chinese technology, infrastructure, and consumer goods. For China, energy security and regional stability are paramount. Taking sides in a conflict involving Iran would risk alienating these lucrative markets and jeopardizing vital energy flows. But that's not the only factor making Beijing cautious. China's leadership is acutely aware of the risks of openly defying United States sanctions. Washington has already moved to punish 5 Chinese entities in April of 2025 for assisting Iran's missile program. For Beijing, the costs of provoking United States ire, loss of access to Western technology, financial markets, and global supply chains, are simply too high. As Andrea Gazzelli, a China-Middle East expert at the University of Exeter, explains, Beijing is trying to stabilize the relations with Washington to buy some time to further increase its tech and economic self-sufficiency. That's more important than rebuilding the Iranian Air Force. Even as Iran pleads for advanced jets and missile batteries, China stalls. Experts like Hamidreza Azizi, a fellow at the German Institute for International and Security Affairs, point out that China's most consequential support for Iran comes not through arms sales, but through continued purchases of Iranian oil. These oil deals provide Tehran with critical revenue, helping the regime weather sanctions and fund its domestic priorities. But when it comes to supplying the kind of advanced weaponry that could alter the military balance, China hesitates. As Farzan Sabat from the Geneva Graduate Institute observes, Tehran doesn't have any good options when it comes to foreign military partners. Even if China were to deliver a limited number of J-10C fighters or HQ-9 batteries, Iran would need far more to achieve meaningful air superiority in any future conflict. The cost would be enormous, and the political risks even greater. Let's pause here and reflect on what this means for Iran. In the space of just a few weeks, Tehran has discovered that its strategic partnerships, painstakingly built over decades, are fragile, transactional, and ultimately unreliable in a crisis. The sense of isolation is palpable, not just among policymakers, but across Iranian society. Analysts on Iranian state television openly question the value of the so-called pivot to the east. Reformist politicians warn of a dangerous illusion that friendship with Russia or China can substitute for real, concrete security guarantees. So, what are Iran's options as it surveys the wreckage of its military and the emptiness of its alliances? Some voices in Tehran's corridors of power are doubling down on self-reliance. This is not a new theme. Iran has, for decades, touted its ability to innovate under siege. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps proudly showcases homegrown missile programs, indigenous drones, and cyber attack capabilities. Indeed, Iranian drones have made headlines in conflicts as far away as Ukraine and Yemen. But as one retired Iranian general, speaking anonymously to an international newspaper just last week, cautioned, "No matter how creative we get, we cannot mass-produce a modern air force with scrap metal and sanctions." Another path, one that Iran has walked for many years, is to double down on asymmetric warfare. This means relying on proxy militias in Iraq, Lebanon, Syria, and Yemen, the so-called axis of resistance, as well as on cyber operations, disinformation campaigns, and unconventional tactics. These strategies, while disruptive, have their limits. As the recent conflict demonstrated, when faced with a determined, technologically superior adversary, proxies and propaganda cannot stop precision airstrikes or defend nuclear facilities. The implications of Iran's predicament are profound, not just for Tehran, but for the entire Middle East and the wider world. If Iran cannot restore a credible deterrent, its rivals, Israel, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, may feel emboldened to act ever more aggressively. Already there are signs that Israel is expanding its intelligence operations and deepening security ties with Arab states, creating a de facto anti-Iran coalition. Saudi Arabia, flush with oil revenues and new military purchases, is signaling its readiness to play a more assertive regional role. The risk of escalation, miscalculation, or accidental war is rising. At the same time, Iran's weakened state could tempt outside powers to intervene, either to prop up friendly regimes or to exploit new power vacuums. The United States, Russia, and China all have their own stakes in the region's stability, or instability. Even European powers, wary of new refugee flows and energy shocks, are paying close attention. The balance of power is shifting, not just between states, but within them, as governments face rising public anger, economic pressures, and the threat of internal unrest. For global investors, business leaders, and technology entrepreneurs, this moment should serve as a wake-up call. Geopolitics is not just about tanks and treaties. It is about the flow of capital, the resilience of supply chains, and the ability to adapt to sudden shocks. As Dr. Evangeline Cheng puts it, alliances are transactional. Business deals and strategic partnerships that seem ironclad today can unravel overnight if core interests diverge. Consider the example of Huawei, the Chinese tech giant whose global ambitions were suddenly curtailed by United States sanctions. Or look at international energy markets, where a single conflict in the Strait of Hormuz, through which a fifth of the world's oil passes, can trigger price spikes and supply disruptions worldwide. There are also important lessons for national policymakers and military strategists. First, economic leverage matters more than ever. China's trade with the Gulf Cooperation Council states, topping $300 billion United States dollars last year, far outweighs any single military deal with Iran. Second, self-reliance, while admirable, is no substitute for access to cutting-edge global technology. In a world of complex supply chains and rapid innovation, no country, however determined, can go it alone indefinitely. Iran's experience is a cautionary tale for other so-called middle powers who dream of strategic autonomy. Turkey, Egypt, Brazil, and Indonesia all face similar dilemmas as they navigate a world dominated by a handful of superpowers. The lesson is clear. Diversify your alliances, invest in domestic capabilities, but never overestimate the loyalty of partners whose interests may change overnight. Looking ahead, what can Iran realistically do? The menu of options is shrinking. Tehran can try to rebuild its defenses through piecemeal imports, hoping that occasional shipments of Chinese or Russian technology will trickle in despite sanctions. It can pour more resources into domestic innovation, betting that Iranian scientists and engineers can close the gap with Western and Israeli technology. Or it can lean ever more heavily on its proxies, cyber warriors, and unconventional tactics, accepting that these are tools of disruption rather than deterrence. None of these paths restore the strategic depth or security Iran once hoped to achieve through alliances with Russia or China. The true consequence may be a Middle East that is even more unstable, unpredictable, and prone to sudden shocks. Regional players will hedge their bets, seeking new partners and security guarantees. Global powers will recalculate their strategies, balancing short-term gains against long-term risks. Here's a revealing detail most headlines have missed. In the month of March next year, China, Russia, and Iran held joint naval exercises in the Gulf of Oman, a highly publicized show of unity, complete with photo ops and patriotic speeches. Yet behind closed doors, Beijing quietly reassured Gulf Arab leaders that it had no intention of delivering the advanced fighters or missile systems to Iran that they feared. Sometimes, the most powerful statement is not what is given, but what is withheld. For the Iranian public, these developments raise painful questions about their country's future. Can Iran break out of its strategic isolation? Will new waves of sanctions and technological denial push the country further into economic hardship and political repression? Or could a new generation of Iranian leaders seize this moment to recalibrate foreign policy, seek new partners, including perhaps in the global south, and invest in real domestic reform? The wider world should not underestimate the stakes. The Middle East has long been a laboratory for great power competition, where the fault lines between East and West, North and South, are always shifting. As China's economic reach grows and Russia seeks to reassert itself as a global player, Iran's predicament highlights the limits of both Moscow's and Beijing's ambitions. For now, their support is transactional, limited, and always subject to the shifting winds of global politics. If you are a business leader, now is the time to stress test your supply chains, diversify your markets, and prepare for geopolitical shocks. If you are a policymaker, remember that the loyalty of allies, be they superpowers or neighboring states, is always conditional. And if you are a technologist or entrepreneur, recognize that access to innovation is shaped by politics as much as by engineering. As we close this deep dive, let's return to our core question. Is Iran's strategic isolation a temporary setback, or does it mark the dawn of a new era in Middle Eastern power politics? The answer, as ever, is uncertain. But one thing is clear: the world is watching, and the choices made in Tehran, Moscow, and Beijing will reverberate far beyond the region, shaping the future of global economics, technology, and security. If you found this analysis eye-opening, don't forget to subscribe for future deep dives into global economics and technology. What do you think? Has Iran's pivot to the east failed, or is there still a path forward? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and as always,